All over the world today, practically speaking, no exception, economic inequality is increasing. It has to do with the fundamentalist operation of the market. Let the market loose, no holds barred, and you will get that. The more you put in, the more you get out. And as it says in the Gospel according to St. Matthew, to he who has, more will be given, and from he who has nothing, that little he has will be taken. So we live in the St. Matthew economics. Now that leads to an obvious prediction: increasing revolts all over the world. The revolt is not the same as a revolution. A revolution is a change of the system. A revolt is making power uncomfortable for the power wielder, making him move a couple of miles from Cairo to Sharm el-Sheikh. And the result so far is military dictatorship. It's not at all clear what will come out of that. We are in Act 2. Act 1 was glorious, heroic, wonderful. Egypt, through Camp David, being a part of it, a corrupt country, also at Sadat's time, bribed 1.5 billion as opposed to 4 billion per year for Israel, not the official 2 billion. That bribery, of course, goes to the military in order to preserve the power. What does the military say in Egypt when they come into power? First thing they say, the only thing they have said, in which you can believe, is that all international accords will be upheld. That means Camp David, it means the agreement of joint blockade of Gaza. They never had success with Syria. They had success for some time with Lebanon, no longer. It's unraveling. They had success with military, secular, fascist Turkey, but not with civilian, non-military, democratic Islamic Turkey. They had success with Jordan. They managed to avoid the brother of King Hussein, the gentle, fine, cultured Crown Prince Hassan, in favor of that non-entity, the son King Abdullah. They've had lasting success with Egypt, the most important of the countries. They have tried to have success with Iraq. Even that one is now smoldering. So that's the situation we're in. I have pointed to 3 factors: the US empire, the increasing inequality, and the increasing repression. I have pointed to the revolt against it. In Wisconsin, the point is, of course, not only teachers' salaries, but the right of collective bargaining. The right of collective bargaining is institutionalized in the human rights, but not in what Washington understands by human rights. They understand only the civil political rights. Now, the Universal Declaration is not international law. It's a beautiful declaration, 10 December 1948. It's a declaration. The international law is from 16 December 1966, the 2 covenants. The first covenant, civil and political rights, is very similar to the declaration. The second covenant, economic, social and cultural rights, is completely new. Talks about right of employment, right to collective bargaining, right to vacation, leisure, right to a minimum wage sufficient to a life in dignity. In other words, all those things that make you understand why the United States never ratified it. And why it is so important for the mainstream media, when they talk about human rights, never to mention the Second Convention. Now, in these revolts, they're heading for a tough time. I can safely assume that US Israel is working full-time on what? Well, they're first of all working on maintaining Camp David, maintaining the Egyptian-Israeli semi-alliance, and as a part of it, maintaining the suppression of Gaza. But then they're working full-time on another thing. And that other thing is probably to get a better control of Middle East economies. The control by autocracies, be they monarchs or other forms of autocrats, is not the one that is most friendly to unlimited direct foreign investment. It's usually controlled and quite often quite inefficient. The argument will increasingly be heard about the inefficiency of Middle East economies and how important it is to break out from the reins and hold by the autocrats in order to liberate the economies. Now, liberate means to put them under US investment control. In other words, it's a story we've heard, and it's what you would expect in an empire on the way down, seeing that winning wars seems no longer to be attainable. Having said that, we go to Afghanistan. What was it about? It is very, very clearly put to me as a mediator in February 2001. That means 7 months before 9/11, Transcend, our organization, which is a non-governmental mediation organization, we're mediating between factions in Afghanistan, in Peshawar. The Taliban made it impossible to do it in Kabul or other places. One of the participants among the 100 Afghans, who were divided in 30 former cabinet members, 30 sheikhs, and 30 professors, the professors not being very useful, since they have a tendency to confuse reality with books about reality, and are more at home in the latter than the former. And their closest brushes against reality would be bookshelves in the library. Now, I'm myself one of them, partly, so I know what I'm talking about. The remaining 10 of the 100 were ladies, women. Fantastic. And they were given exercises in conflict resolution, and of course the women were the better ones. I mean, I started praising them. Somebody kicked me on the leg saying, "Don't praise them too much, the men cannot take it." Okay. So my short period of flirtation with 10 Afghan ladies was brought to an end. Having said that, he said, the former Prime Minister, what we have arrived at, and I'll give you the 5 points immediately, is the best I've seen, but it has no chance because the US will attack us in October. It was 8 months before it happened. It was 7 months before 9/11, the official reason. They said, "Come to my house this evening, we have a map and I'll show you." They're going to do it for 2 reasons. They want a base for the coming war with China, and they want an oil pipeline from the Caspian, Turkmenistan, via Afghanistan to Pakistan and the Indian Ocean. So he came to the map, February, he put his finger, and I removed his finger, and under it was written Bagram. Evidently he was well informed. Evidently the war was planned well ahead of time. Evidently US geopolitics is based on long-term planning and short-term pretexts. You wait till the pretext comes up. Then you have two pots boiling with pretext, and behind them two other pots with the reality. And then you serve a stew with somewhat different composition depending on to whom you are serving it. How many lies can you be served? Is there no limit to it? What happened in Madison, Wisconsin was a totally new type of nonviolence I have never, I'm a specialist on it, seen before. A group of people in the Senate depriving the Senate of quorum by hiding in an undisclosed place. It's not exactly according to democratic theory, nor is it according to democratic theory to deprive a substantial group of civil servants of their human rights. So you can hold one breach against the other. I find it imaginative, I find it creative. Exactly the creativity the world expects from the United States of America. So having said that, let me now come to the key point and then to a conclusion. The key point is, yes, Professor Galtung, all very good. You want to cut 50%. And which one, with 50% would you start? I will start with the bases and the long-range weapon platforms, the aircraft carriers and the missiles. I would start with everything offensive. I would restructure towards defensive defense. Complete disarmament of the US is an impossibility. A country that cannot even have gun control, and where one 19-year-old girl after the other stands up and adores the Second Amendment. You cannot go for that. But you could have transarmament from offensive to defensive. And I would claim an enormous increase in security. But there is another approach, still better. If you are in conflict with somebody, for heaven's sake, solve the conflict. But in order to solve the conflict, you have to know what the other guy stands for. I'm coming back to Al-Qaeda. Right now, I brought you to Afghanistan. And that means I have to talk with somebody, a very diverse group called by US press, called Taliban. It's the plural of Talib, which means a student, particularly of the Quran. In other words, a struggle against Taliban sounds like somewhat anti-theological and doesn't come down very well linguistically when you listen to it with Arab ears. Having said that, if you talk with them, what do they say? My standard opening question as a mediator is, what does the Afghanistan look like that you would like to live in? And I've asked it hundreds of times in Afghanistan. High up, low, down, sideways, all kinds of ways. I talked with Taliban, I even talked with people in State Department and Pentagon, just to show my infinite tolerance as a mediator. Talking with all kinds of people. And it's not a question of whether you like them or not. You learn very quickly to put that aside. And you learn very quickly to appreciate that there is no human being on this world who doesn't have at least one legitimate goal. What the Taliban typically say are three things. Point one, under no circumstance a secular Afghanistan. That is not Islamic fundamentalism. Islam in itself is not open to secularism. Islam does not have the New Testament injunction saying, give to Caesar that of Caesar and to God that of God. That is an opening for secularism in Christian countries. But Islam as a religion has much more ease contacting secular than Christianity. Why? If you read the 3 articles of faith in Christianity, they are quite hard to believe. They ask you to believe a lot. Rising to heaven on the 2nd day, sitting next to the Lord, there to judge every human being. There is no such thing in Islam. Islam is highly non-dogmatic. If you look at the 5 pillars of Islam, starting with the Shahada, the article of faith, has, that is correct, the idea of monotheism and Muhammad as the prophet. But it doesn't go into immaculate conception, half human being, half God, and a strange entity called the Holy Spirit. It's very difficult to get hold of. There's nothing of that. The second is 5 times prayer a day. The third pillar is the zakat, sharing with the poor. The fourth is Ramadan, fasting 1 month, to build into you solidarity with those who have nothing to eat and nothing to drink. And the fifth is going to the sacred place, the Hajj, to Mecca. Now, what these 5 things have in common are 2 themes: togetherness and sharing. That being the case, it took only a couple of months for Turkey to adjust to parliamentary democracy. Indonesia has the same. The first one out, but in an autocratic fashion, was Tunisia. And the first president of Tunisia, Bourguiba, in his decree number 2 after he came to power, declared parity between man and woman. And that's the reason why, when you saw the televised visions of what happened in the streets of Tunisia, you saw 50% women. Egypt hasn't had the same, but it'll come. So I just bring up that point. Could be actually that dogmatic Christian countries would have more difficulties coming to grips with secularism. Could be that some of those countries are called states, and some of them are called southern states in the US. And you can have a look at them if you want this thesis put to the test. Now, having said that, I think we can safely say that the Taliban, when it comes to their atrocities against women, are on the course of change. I've heard them say very often, yes, we did wrong things. And we try to excuse it by saying we are a little mountain place, 20,000 villages far away from everything else, and when we are visited, we don't like the type of visits we get. But we know we have to change. But we are not going to be told that by Americans and by feminists, and particularly not by American feminists. We are going to be told that and how to do it by our brothers and sisters in Muslim countries. I think that's very important. So, point 2. They hate Kabul. They want a heavily decentralized Afghanistan. 20,000 villages and 7 nations. 2 of them, Tajik Pashto, are the ones ruling Afghanistan. Kabul is at the border between the 2. They don't accept that. Even if very many Taliban are Pashtuns. And to that becomes logical the principle of living together with their neighbors. Many of us are Tajiks, we want to open borders to Tajikistan, to Uzbekistan. Many of us speak Dari, which is the Afghan word for Farsi, which is the language of Iran. We want open borders. In other words, a community with the surrounding countries. There will be 9 countries altogether. The 5 former Soviet republics, Pakistan, Iran, and Azad Kashmir, the Pakistani part of Kashmir. Now, will that happen? Well, the third point is the following. We are sick and tired of being invaded. And we know that some of that is inspired by that crazy Tory geopolitician who in 1904 wrote the ridiculous thesis that who rules Eastern Europe rules in Central Asia. The ruler of Central Asia rules the world island, meaning Eurasia. Whoever rules Eurasia rules the world. President Nixon said it was the most inspiring book he had ever read. And it has been underlying much of US geopolitics and their despair when the Russians seem to be in control. I don't think the world is run from Afghanistan. I think Afghanistan has the right to run itself. And the country most reminiscent of Afghanistan in the world is Switzerland. The United States is not the slightest of a model. Switzerland is a federation of different nations, not 7, 8, but 4. Not 20,000 villages, only 6,000. And neutrality. Very many Afghans are interested in that formula. And they want good relations to all their neighbors. And the country teaching that in the world today is the most gifted political country, Turkey. The policy is good relations to all 8 neighbors. How about Iraq? I think it's important to pay attention to the fact that Iraq does not exist. It's an artificial construction by 2 civil servants from the Foreign Office in 1916. And they were sent there and they had a task. And I was once invited to a conference, a place in England by the Foreign Office, the Defense Department, and the Department for International Development, to address their 54 UK specialists on terrorism, which was quite a group. And it was a place in England. Now, who can resist an invitation to go to, quote, a place in England? And I was dying to see where that place was, of course, in a black limousine and all that kind of thing. So for being a left-wing peace researcher, I'm doing quite well. Having said that, I was imitating the 2 civil servants in Iraq. Jim, what have you got here? And the 54 were roaring with laughter because they know their own people. So they had a map. The task was to design a country that would combine the oil in Kirkuk with the oil in Basra. The rest is a question of drawing lines. And wherever Anglos have been, you find straight lines on the map, including in the US. I attribute that to an overdose of Euclidean geometry at school. And that chaos geometry would have served them much better, but to their defense it should be said that that was invented 1 century later, so it came a little bit too late. Having said that, it does not exist. It's an artificial construction of 18 provinces. Number 19 in the vicinity, Kuwait, was taken already in 1898 as a protectorate by Britain. And in all likelihood, it breaks into 3 pieces: Kurdish, Sunni, Shia. The Shias want open borders to their fellow Arab Shias in Khuzestan in Iran. The Kurds want open border to the Kurds in the other 3 countries, Turkey, Iran, Syria. And they may want, at least that is Transcend's proposal, that the sum total of these 4 autonomies is Kurdistan without moving a single border. And the Sunnis have been running the place being a minority of 16%. That can only be either by help from the outside or by most brutal dictatorship, be that of the Qasem or Saddam Hussein variety. The country is not viable, maybe as a confederation or a very loose federation. They will seek different policies, and somehow probably the international community will have to support the Sunni part of it. Yeah, I notice with interest that Baghdad is now contemplating suing United States for damage due to excessive bombing and things of that kind. So we'll then have to discuss which bomb was excessive and which one was not. Karzai is exploring reconstruction with the Soviets. Iraq is selling oil to China. Interesting. Somehow George Bush was wrong in assuming that the Vietnam syndrome has been beaten. What's the solution for Iraq? Well, first of all, it's for the Iraqis to decide, well, just like it is for the Afghans to decide. But the guess would be a very loose confederation. And that confederation would probably be a part of an organization for security and cooperation in West Asia. Just like the solution for Israel and Palestine, in my mind, is a Middle East community modeled after the European community of 1958 of Israel with the 5 border countries. That could simply work one day. When Israel gets out of its autistic psychopathology, with Sharon as a metaphor for the mental activity of Israel. I have been there very, very often, and they let me talk and say such things. In New York, Chicago, Miami, it's a little bit more difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, I've given you a mouthful, maybe even 2 of them. Let me just have a look. No, I have covered all points. Thanks to you.